So friends, hearty welcome to the next edition of the VDMA CEO's Thought Leadership Series. And it's pleasure for me today to welcome Mr. Narayan Krishnamohan. Mohan is the Managing Director, BASF India, and Head of BASF South Asia, which includes India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Mohan holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Nagpur University. He joined BASF in 1995 and has worked with BASF in Germany, Singapore, Hong Kong, and since 2019, he's MD of BASF India and head of BASF South Asia. So hearty welcome to you, Mohan. Pleasure having you with us today for the next edition of the VDMA CEO's Thought Leadership Series.
Thank you for having me. I mean, it's really a pleasure to be here and look forward to having a nice chat with you and sharing some thoughts. Yeah.
Right. Mohan, if we look at the last 6 months, I would say it's been totally unprecedented. We've been using the term VUCA earlier I thought very liberally. And now it is really when we have felt the impact of the uncertainty factor. In fact, COVID has impacted more than 213 countries and over 28 million people have been infected by COVID. Pundits have called it the black swan of 2020. It has hit the global recession, and perhaps it's for the first time that supply side, demand side, as well as workforce has been impacted, and not only in one region, but all over the globe. Mohan, coming to BASF, what has been the impact of COVID on BASF in India as well as BASF globally? And if I may just add one more question here is, would COVID ultimately impact or disrupt any expansion plans of BASF in India?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's kind of you can have a long answer to it, you can have a short answer to it. I think there's some context required. Firstly, BASF as a chemical company which is into a variety of industries.
Right.
So we serve industry across the board. Jokingly, I always say, by definition, you get the average of the industry when you look at BASF. So we go all the way from ag and nutrition to automotive, construction, care. So we supply a wide variety of the manufacturing industries. So what happened with COVID is, firstly, on a global basis, it hit different markets and countries at different points in time. So already towards the end of last year, you saw, and early this year, you saw impact on China. And then it moved across to Europe, to the Americas. And by the time it hit us in India, it was probably end of March. So our previous financial year was not really impacted by COVID. That said, the impact across BASF Group, because BASF is a global company, was quite profound. And also you see it from our quarterly results and statement where our CEO essentially withdrew his outlook for 2020 because he said it's not possible to give you an outlook for 2020 anymore, given the uncertainty. And also compared to previous year, the results, I mean, it's being a listed company. I mean, we talk only what's in public domain. So you saw the impact. And that said, the largest exposure of a single industry to BASF worldwide, as well as in India, is the automotive industry. Right. And we all know what happened to the automotive industry on a global basis with COVID. What's also clear to us in India is the automotive industry was already going down in the previous year because of NBFC crisis, upcoming regulation. COVID just added another nail into the coffin, we would say. Yeah? Although I don't see it as the end, it's just the fact is that it's been a tough year for BASF in India. And I also came up with my quarterly results a few weeks ago, which clearly showed, firstly, the impact of the automotive and the manufacturing and the lockdowns that we had in the country. At the same time, it also showed the resilience of our portfolio. The fact that we were so widespread, the fact that ag did well, or nutrition. In times like this, people tend to focus a lot more on hygiene, on nutrition, on and the good monsoon in India enabled us to do well in these areas which are rather critical for mankind. So as a consequence, the balance in our portfolio and the resilience of our portfolio was quite evident in the last quarter. So despite having the big industrial production reduction in the country, and you saw the GDP numbers which came out a few weeks ago. Despite that, our announced results were, in comparison, not too bad. So we did not reach our ambitious goals, but clearly the balance in our portfolio helped us to survive the quarter, I would say. And now, to answer the question on our investment plans and the strategic aspect, so we see this, yes, as a major event in 2020, but we also believe that the long-term story of India is intact. Yeah. Now, doesn't matter who you talk to, whether you talk to me or you talk to any of my peers in the industry, they will all tell you one thing: short-term visibility, we are blind.
Right.
We are navigating on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Medium to long term, we see this market recovery. And there are two schools of thought. One school of thought says that it will come back to the levels, like if you take a period like 2030, then you don't have to adjust much. It will come back to, it will grow faster when we recover, and you will hit back the same trajectory that you were expecting before. There's another school of thought which says that, well, it will grow back, but it will grow at a curve which is slightly below the previous expectation. So one's somewhere in between. And no one's got a crystal ball today how long this lasts. But principally, what I would say is the long-term story of the country is intact. It is driven by consumption, and there will be consumption and growth of manufacturing in the country.
Right. Thank you, Mohan. I think that's well put from your side. And as we've all seen, I think when the lockdown started, we were all hopeful that at the end of the financial year, India may perhaps be around a slight negative. But now the forecasts have changed dramatically in the last month or so. As you mentioned, the GDP figures were minus 24%, and various rating agencies are now talking of -8 to -10% GDP dip for India in this financial year. But I think what you mentioned is very correct. One has to take it on day-to-day or week-to-week basis, and it's really difficult to predict how things will be in the future. But still, I would like to ask you, Mohan, how do you feel how would the chemical industry, what are the outlook for the chemical industry in India in the next 2 to 3 years? And when we are talking of next year or the year after that, Mohan, what are actually going to be the demand triggers for the chemical or specialty chemical industries?
Yeah, so again, we have to start with where we are today. So in the Indian context, the Indian chemical industry is still at a very early stage, I would say. We have two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, we have the refinery and petchem side, which is fairly well developed.
Right.
And then you have the downstream pharma, ag related APIs and formulations, which are reasonably well developed. In between, you have a missing link, which is entire value chains of chemicals, base chemicals, organic chemicals, specialty chemicals, which are missing, which makes us highly dependent on imports for a wide variety of building blocks, as I would call it. That said, if the potential for us to bring this together in a longer term strategic horizon, and I would not hazard a guess by saying 2 to 3 years. I don't think it's possible to do this in 2 to 3 years. This is more like a 10-15-year story where we can build these value chains, and we say that, okay, these are the areas where India needs a certain build-up of infrastructure. I mean infrastructure not in terms of roads. Yes, we do need that as well. But I meant the infrastructure on chemistry and chemicals, in terms of the value chains, that's right, starting from the refinery up to the end. And we cannot do everything everywhere. We need to pick those areas where we are having a base load, where we are strong, and where we can also potentially be export hubs for the world. Um, and these are a few chemistries, a few lines which we have to take and build. And I see a lot of potential to develop those. What you do with that, of course, is you build a very globally competitive system, ecosystem, which has the entire value chain of chemistry and chemical building blocks, which can then eventually make the downstream industries also competitive. So that's what we are missing as such as a country. And I think this is a good time for us, and the government's initiative in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and getting investments into the country is precisely in this direction. And I see that as a huge positive. And I think the time is just right where we can do this and build those building blocks to have entire value chains which are strategically relevant for the country.
Right, right. You mentioned also about Atmanirbhar Bharat, Mohan. So also the clarion call of our Honorable Prime Minister, vocal for local slogan. Now, what is the significance of Atmanirbhar Bharat or vocal for local, specifically for the chemical industry, Mohan? And do you foresee investments while the main aim of the government is to attract investments into the country? So, do you feel that these endeavors or these measures would attract FDIs into the country?
I strongly believe it will, for multiple reasons. Firstly, the market has a consumption story. Yeah,
Right.
you do have a consumption story in the country. It's at a stage where the consumption pattern is just picking up, and you see opportunities to grow there. What you also see is infrastructure development happening, and it is in terms of power, in terms of effluent treatment, in terms of land reforms, in terms of labor availability, in terms of quality of labor. So everything is coming together. The timing is just right, in my opinion. And what I see also is, I mean, if you look at the announcements in the last 12 to 18 months, which the government has made in terms of corporate tax, new investments, and how to facilitate, and the kind of you've just become competitive versus the rest of the world. Historically, when you looked at India as a market, if you were to make a dollar profit in India, you would end up paying 48% as taxes,
Right.
various taxes. I mean, not just corporate tax, but when you added all of that together, so at the end of the day, for every dollar you earned, you paid 48 cents somewhere.
Right.
And that made you uncompetitive versus some of the countries in ASEAN, Korea, where probably all put together, you paid about 20 cents to a dollar.
Right.
There are two types of companies investing, right? There is the homegrown companies investing, which
Right.
obviously it's home turf, you will invest here. And then the FDI that you talked about. In FDI, it's a competitive world.
Right.
You can invest in India, you can invest somewhere else, and there are a reasonable amount of free trade agreements available on this planet. So you would obviously leverage those places which are the most competitive in terms of investments.
Right.
So I think with what the government has done in the last few months, you have a combination of factors. The environment is just right. You have a growing demand in the country. You have the people who are available as well. So the whole ecosystem can be put together. So and also the ease of doing business. I mean, we have improved significantly. We are not at the end of the road there. We will
Right.
further keep improving. So I see that the next few years, if we do it, we have to do it now. This is the
No,
time.
right,
Yeah.
right. I think that's very well put, Mohan. And also, I think some of the states have undertaken labor reforms, land reforms, I think, which would help to make India overall quite attractive then for the FDIs. And as you mentioned also, with the tax cuts that have been undertaken by the government. So it does make India as an look to be an attractive destination. Mohan, you mentioned also about the labor force, and we are seeing that the difficulty various industries are facing because labor force has gone back to their villages, to their states. Uh, so here is the question, people are talking about automation, people are talking about industry 4.0. What is the level of automation, Mohan, in the chemical industry in India? And at BASF in India, are there any digital challenges you're facing?
So I think digitalization per se and Industry 4.0 is something. If you look back, I think we started this process probably around 20-25 years ago in a minor scale
Right,
in the chemical industry, and in the last few years we have realized that we haven't done enough, and we accelerate to a large extent.
right,
Um, uh, I mean, I still come from the time when I first came into the industry. DCS was a new thing, you know. Coming from that era to today,
right,
you see a phenomenal change, and it's again a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, the risk of unemployment
right,
with digitalization is fairly high. But the way I like to see it is reskilling and redeployment of the workforces in other areas.
absolutely.
So there are a lot of jobs to be created. So again, at the end of the day, what is a country like India looking for? India is trying to create a world-class infrastructure which is globally competitive. And if we start doing things, for example, what China did 20 years ago and try to copy that, then we will always be 20 years behind. We will never catch up.
Right,
And I'm not now wanting to start a competition now between countries. That's not the point. The whole point
right,
is if you need to somehow make good time, you need to do things differently.
right,
And I think this is a good way that we can leapfrog a couple of steps and use the latest advances in technology to make sure that the assets that we build and the processes that we build are much more competitive than some of our peers who have invested 20 years ago,
right,
because they simply didn't have that possibility.
right,
And we all know that to upgrade an existing site
right.
into the current state of the art is not that easy.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we as a country have that ability, that at this point in time, that opportunity. That said, are we open to it as a country? And there I have to be a little bit critical.
Mhm.
um, um, uh, Somehow I understand the balance between employment and automation.
Automation, right,
Yes. And somehow with our socialistic background, we tend to go with employment.
right,
And I understand that we need to increase employment in the country. But upskilling our labor force
right,
and creating a globally competitive industrialized nation
right,
has a lot more long-term strategic advantage, in my opinion. So we need to pursue that.
right, right, right. And also, Mohan, if you look at the total level of automation in India, we say only about it's only 6 to 8%, and India has a lot of potential. We can easily grow it to 25 to 30% till 2025. And I think you rightly mentioned about the sensitive issue of automation and workforce, retaining of the workforce. But I think as we have seen, when, for example, when Ola or Uber came, there was always a fear that the traditional taxis would be impacted. But what we have seen with Ola Uber coming in, that we have created entrepreneurs. Young people have got jobs. So I think it's a gradual, maybe the jobs will change, skill sets would change, and new skill sets would have to be developed. Um,
Totally agree.
Right. What is, in fact, Mohan, I wanted to also ask you, what is the level of the skill level in the chemical industry? Now, if you're interviewing young graduates, how do you feel? Are they ready for the industry or do they need some training? Because we always say our young graduates somehow miss the practical aspects, unlike Germany, where we have the dual system of education and the students also get the practical training. So, how has been your experience interacting with young graduates during interviews? Mohan?
So here it's kind of a area where I must say my experience is relatively limited because like when you read my CV, the last 16 of the last 18 years I've lived abroad.
Abroad.
So I must say it's based on my limited interaction. So I'm not the expert on this topic, I would say. But that said, there are a lot of similarities. If you take a country like India, a country like I was also exposed to China to a large extent. So our Asian education systems, our ages are quite similar in that perspective. We are getting into a lot of theory, but not enough practical experience
Right.
in our education, and that's applicable everywhere. So that's missing. Um, However, when you look at what in the old days we used to call the ITIs, so there you get the people who are experienced with industry. I wouldn't totally go by saying that we don't have an education system which gives that. We do have, and now the question is, we treat this as two different tiers of education. We do not relate to that too much. And in that context, I would say that um, I very much welcome what we have in Germany, where the industry and academia collaboration is a lot higher than what we have here. And I'm not just talking in the cliched research terms, because we always use it in terms of research, but also in terms of this apprenticeships, like you do 6 months, one semester with a company. We don't have too many of those patterns in our education. And that's something which I must say in this, if you look at the spirit of the new education policy, which the Honorable Prime Minister announced a few weeks ago,
Right.
I think in terms of spirit, it goes into that direction.
Right.
And of course, it's the first year, and there is an intent behind it. So, how that evolves, how that develops, and how do we transition from a 10 plus 2 plus 3 or 4 kind of bookish education to a more practical education, which is the intent of the new educational policy, is, I think, critical to ensure that we have a very strong labor workforce and competent labor force.
Right, right. So true, Mohan. Mohan, BASF is also part of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. In fact, the plastic waste is a major problem in India. We are now talking of circular economy, where we are trying to get more life or more utility out of the products. And this topic, I believe I've seen some of your videos. You talk very passionately on this subject. It's very close to your heart. So, what initiatives have been undertaken by BASF in this direction, Mohan?
Yeah, right. So yes, you're right. I'm absolutely passionate about this topic, and probably all of us have to be, because it is a critical situation on a global level. I mean, you have statistics about how many tons of plastics versus how many tons of fish is in the ocean left.
Right.
And those numbers are scary. And if we don't do something today, then our next generations are not going to forgive us. That said, yes, I think the industry has woken up to it. BASF, along with our founding members, maybe amongst the founding members of the alliance, and we've contributed significantly in terms of resources, both financial as well as people, towards the alliance. Now, the alliance works on different levels. It works in terms of research, in terms of technology, as to what should be the plastics of the future. So like my CEO always says, plastics are not bad. What we do with plastics is bad. So if
Right.
you take the entire life cycle of a glass bottle versus a plastic bottle, then the carbon footprint of a plastic bottle is a lot better than the of the glass bottle. However, the fact that we don't dispose it of properly, we just chuck it somewhere which finds its way into the ocean, is a terrible thing.
Right.
It's about what we do with the plastic. How do we manage end of life?
Right.
And that's the critical aspect. So in that context, we work on several areas. We work in terms of technology, both in terms of chemical and physical recycling, as well as even fundamental research as to what can be the plastics of tomorrow. So this topic about multi-layered packaging, what should be the multi-layered packaging of the future, or what are the properties that we need which can make the materials of tomorrow more recyclable. So right from the research phase, that you bring the criteria of recyclability into the research process. And so in terms of renewable plastics, in terms of recyclable plastics, so the fair amount of research is going on. The, at the same time, we are also working on projects as to how to clear up our water bodies. It's about educating. Since time immemorial, we have somehow gravitated towards water sources, rivers. I mean, in India, for example, the Ganga River or the Mekong River in Southeast Asia, and settlements have been around the rivers for good reason, because you get the good soil, fertile soil around it, and so on. But then what happens is, with our underdeveloped housing and recycling and garbage disposal systems, what happens to the garbage? They just dump into the river and then eventually find its way to the ocean. So how do we ensure cleanup of the rivers? So there are several projects running, even a couple of projects running in India about cleaning the Ganges, and how do you educate communities? And just cleaning it and putting into a landfill is no good. So then it's about ecosystems. So you have ecosystems there, which is about collecting the waste, and finding ways to recycle it. You need people who collect it. You need people who manage the supply chain to get it into. Because at the end of the day, a plastic bottle is a whole lot of air. So
Right.
transporting air is not really, from an economic perspective, worthwhile. But you need to do it. So the different machineries in terms of balers, in terms of crushers, so that you make it transportable to a point where you have a critical mass for it to be recycled, segregation and recycle. So there are various activities being undertaken. And the alliance is very much active in India, in Asia, and across the world. So multiple aspects, and we just can't be fast enough. Yeah, so
Okay.
so it needs a lot of resources behind, and it needs a fair amount of support and commitment.
Right. Certainly a very commendable endeavor, Mohan, and congratulations and compliments on this endeavor. And
It's an
wish,
alliance. It's not just
yeah,
BSF. BSF is
yeah.
just a
But
part.
BSF is a part of the alliance, right, right. But
I have to
really,
be
and
very
it's
clear. I don't want to take undue credit.
and it's very much the need of the hour also, Mohan, as you rightly said, what happens with the plastic. And
Right.
since plastic plays such an important part in our packaging industry. Uh, Mohan, let me come to the final question. Now, with so many unforeseen factors colliding all at once, the journey for the CEOs have become more difficult, more challenging. What we would like you to share, Mohan, is two or three tips from your side. What would be your suggestion to the German CEOs? How can they navigate their boat in this stormy water that we are surrounded with? So we would like to hear suggestions from your side, Mohan.
Firstly, I think I'm underqualified to suggest that to most of them. I mean, I keep talking to many of them and seek their advice, and and I must say that each of us has to find our own recipe eventually. As CEOs, our primary responsibility is also to ensure our company and all our people are doing well. They feel safe, and it's not been easy. 6 months. at home, and not all of us live in large enough spaces. I mean, many of our colleagues are constrained for space, and working from home is not easy. I mean, running 3, 4 telephone calls at the same time because you are speaking, your spouse is speaking, your kids are also somehow having online education. It's not been easy from an emotional and psychological perspective for a lot of colleagues. So how do we support them? How do we connect with our employees? Our possibility to walk around the shop floor, have a chat with one or the other colleagues over a coffee, all that has disappeared in this short period of time. So there is something which what can you do? So I try my best that every month I try to connect to as many people as possible by having WebExes, chats, and allowing a larger time for Q&A than the usual presentation stuff, that what we want to tell them. No, it's about what important for them to hear about. So that's one aspect about our well-being of our people. Of course, we provide the infrastructure and so on. But infrastructure in terms of security, some of them needed support on hospitals, or some people got sick, and so how do you support? So things like that. How can you support as an organization? How can you support the community around your production sites, your offices? So all of us have done a fair amount of stuff in that context, and we have all managed. I mean, the usual stuff which any MBA class will tell you. You need to still make sure that you are very close to your customers, and we've all done that, and we've been focused on what the problems that the customers are, what are the problems with supply chain, where there were issues with related to working capital, or issues regarding government policy. So all these are topics which I think each one of us have addressed in our industry adequately. Where we have probably neglected as a community is probably ourselves and our families. That's where I think in the initial phases, I felt quite guilty of that fact, that we take things for granted with ourselves and at our homes. Whether it is your physical well-being, whether it's your emotional well-being, psychological well-being. So in that context, I think investing into that has been important. So I tell my leadership team that, I know it's difficult for you to go on a vacation somewhere, but just take a week off. Don't touch your phones, don't touch your laptops. Take a week off, relax, do some yoga, meditation, something, whatever suits you. So I'm myself into running. So I had the excuse that the beach is closed. I can't run on the beach anymore. So, but yeah, there was a treadmill. So I used the treadmill, beat the treadmill out. And thankfully, in this lockdown, home cooked food and a reasonable amount of exercise has helped me regain my fitness. So losing about 12 kilos, that has been really worthwhile.
Oh, that's
And
incredible.
like my people in communications tell me that I need to re-engineer my wardrobe and contribute to the economy now. so, so I think each one has to find its own way. We've had to manage business in difficult times. There has been issues, like you correctly said, both on demand side as well as the supply side. So managing that entire value chain and supply chain has been difficult. We have had to play by the ear, be spontaneous. Nobody can guide you through it. And like I tell some of my colleagues, that this is one point where you are lucky if you are not at the top end alone by yourself. Because as you get to the CEO position, you are alone. One level down, at least you have 4 or 5 peers whom you can bounce things with. So in that context, also that community that, when we talk also amongst our fellow colleagues in the German community, it's been very helpful. So I can only say reach out, stay in touch, and yeah, this will all end very soon.
Right. I think that's ending it on a optimistic note. And Mohan, it's been a absolute pleasure interacting with you and hearing your thoughts and views on the chemical industry in India, automation level, and perhaps in this difficult period, what can be the solutions for CEOs? What is the path that CEOs should take during this period and perhaps for the future? On behalf of the German Engineering Federation, Mohan, thank you very much for sparing your time and sharing
Pleasure.
your views with us. Thank you,
My
Mohan, and
pleasure.
all the very best. Stay safe, stay well, and stay connected.
Likewise, you too. You
Right.
too.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.